We have begun to think about past time verbs. We've looked at the imperfect in chapter 21 and now on to chapter 22 and the aorist. These two tense stems both use secondary endings. They are past time, and we'll think about the differences today. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will help students as they progress through the second aorist, active and middle here in chapter 22. Help them as they think yet about those secondary endings and the augment and now the aorist stem and how this particular tense stem is translated. Give them encouragement again in their Greek texts, reading through phrases and even whole sentences now. Help them to understand the interplay of Greek verbs between the present and imperfect and now the aorist and the future as well. Help them to remember those distinctions between root and stem. I ask this in Christ's name. Amen. We have begun to think about these past time verbs here. And just again, to review in English, we add an ed at the end of a word, and that clues us to a past time. In Greek, we have something at the beginning and the end of a word that are going to clue us to the past time. The beginning, yes, it's that augment, either an epsilon or a lengthened vowel, with the imperfect that we've looked at already, and then the aorist. Now, the distinction between these two, again, is that the imperfect is this continuous. There's an event that was going on. There was a stopping point because it happened in the past, but it's a continuous viewpoint. The aorist, on the other hand, is a particular event, but it's bound. There's a sense in which it is boxed in, and that's the emphasis of the aorist. It's an undefined aspect, where the imperfect has that arrow, a continuous aspect. Our augment patterns, if the word begins with a consonant, simple. Just add an epsilon at the beginning, and that is going to clue us to the verb as being a past time verb. If the verb begins with a vowel, that vowel is lengthened, and we've seen these patterns already. Here are the shortened versions. That's the original. Alpha lengthens to eta, epsilon also, omicron to omicron, and eta stays the same. If we have a diphthong, a combination of vowels, this alpha iota, the I sound goes to A, the epsilon iota goes to A, omicron iota, oi sound goes to omega, just the O, ow goes to an eta upsilon, au, and the EU, the U sound goes to ow. And these last two are just very rare. But these others here, especially this pattern, just the addition of the epsilon, the lengthening of the vowel in this direction, and then these three diphthongs more common. Our secondary endings, noted these when we thought about the imperfect, and it's the secondary endings that's going to be on the back side of a word to cue you to past time. And there with the augment at the beginning, either epsilon or a lengthening of some vowel. Those two ideas are going to cue us to a past time reference. So we just remember the new ending, the sigma ending, the third singular, there is no ending, so that epsilon will often be right here. If the next letter in the sequence is a vowel, then this new will show up to provide a bit of separation. For singular men, then te and nu. Keep in mind that here and here we have the same ending, therefore we have the same word, and it's going to be context that's going to distinguish whether it's first singular or third plural. And then we have main, and then saw. How do we get from saw to oo? Yes, you remember that sigma is intervocalic, drops out. The omicron and the epsilon here, the epsilon connecting vowel, contract to oo. Otherwise, the pattern just needs to be memorized, ta, metha, setha, and ta. When we think about our patterns again, we have a root down below, always with an asterisk. Maybe the word has more than one root, and we've seen this if you look at page 454 for a moment, and you look at erchomai. We have noticed already that we have one stem is erch, another is a youth, and we have seen that the present pulls up the root erch, but all other stems, the aorist and the future, all pull up eleuth here as our stem. And so we have to think about which root and then the stem combination. What I want you to notice on page 454 is the difference between erchomai here in that first column with the present, and then go to the third column over. The third column is the aorist active, and that is the column that we're going to be looking at here today. So here is our aorist active and middle. That's chapter 22 that we are looking at, and you can see it draws from eleuth, but there are a couple of nuances, and Mounts notes these in footnote 19. This epsilon upsilon combination ablouts and drops off. This epsilon, yes, is lengthened, and the result is eta, lambda, theta, aelth. That becomes our stem, and then aelthon in the first singular. That again is explained in footnote 19 on page 454. So keep in mind, again, the distinction between roots and then stems, and what takes place from under the ground to actually in a text. The beauty of Greek verbs, again, is specificity. Just think about translation here for a moment in relation to tense and especially aspect here. So this translation provides us an opportunity to think about aspect. And just the simple I love or I am loving, a continuous sense to it. The imperfect I was loving has a stopping point in the past. Future, I will love, but no real essence to aspect. It's just going to happen at some point in the future. The aorist is what we're looking at today. I loved, and it's just a simple statement of love, and you can think of putting a sort of a little bit of a box around it. Maybe not the top end of the box, but a U shape just to have it undefined. That's the essence of the aorist. It's undefined. It's just a simple statement that something happened without a view to internality, without a view to progress. It's a simple statement. The components of the second aorist active, and as Mounts notes, there's no distinction at all between second aorist and first aorist. No distinction, well, I should say no distinction in meaning, simply a distinction in form. We'll see that there's a tense formative with that first aorist, but here in the second aorist, just a simple statement. So again, I'm drawing a line to represent an action, and I'm putting it in a little bit of a box. It just happened, as opposed to the imperfect, where you have a past continuous action going on. Something like that would be a good symbol for it. Keep in mind, the root of the aorist is perhaps going to be different than the root of the present. And then that root takes shape in a particular stem. And then the connecting vowel pattern, OEE, OEO, is consistent all the way through. Why secondary endings? Well, that's right, because it has an augment. And these two ideas will always go together. You see the pattern in full here. We have our augment, our stem, and here the stem and the root are the same. Connecting vowel, personal ending, elabamen. Here's the full paradigm. As I noted earlier, if the first singular and third plural endings are the same, then the whole word is going to look the same. How are we going to distinguish between the two? Context. There's going to be something in context that tells us this is I or they doing the action. The only other nuance, there's no ending here, just like the first singular in the primary endings. There's no ending. Here there's no ending, so in a text, epsilon may be the ending, or there may be a nu, and what would the condition be for that nu? If the following word begins with a vowel, then we need to separate this epsilon from that vowel, and we do so by inserting that nu. The middle passive, we just again apply these same principles, and I trust you're beginning to see the beauty of Greek, the consistency of it. So we have a root again and a stem. We have an augment since we're in the past time tense stems, like the imperfect. And so we use secondary endings. Again, those will always go together, our connecting vowel pattern. And you can see egen amen, egen amen. This pattern of perhaps an augment that will correspond with the secondary endings, the connecting vowel, the stem, these are cells, if you will, that you can begin to fill in your mind. You're going to fill in, is there an augment, yes or no? Is there, well, what kind of stem? There will be a stem. What is the connecting vowel, knowing the pattern? And then what kind of ending are we using? And these cells, if you will, need to be filled in. And you can begin to do that as you look at words, and these cells will help you to parse words. You'll be able to identify the tense stem. Is it present? Is it aorist, imperfect? By looking at these factors and sort of checking them off in your mind. So the middle indicative, we have here our middle passive endings, but here we're just dealing with the middle. We'll see that the aorist passive doesn't use a connecting vowel. It has a tense formative, and we'll look at that in a few chapters, but for now we're just talking about the middle. So that's where we're at. So we use the middle passive endings, main, saw, ta, metha, sitha, nta. You're familiar again with how we get from saw to u. This sigma is intervocalic. Those sigmas, they're strong when they come up against a consonant. That's that square of stops. But here, it drops out because it's between two vowels. So we have that epsilon omicron contraction to get oo here. Otherwise, very basic. And we have our connecting vowel pattern, and we just have those various components that we fill in. Augment, stem, connecting vowel endings. Here again, our full paradigm. I will note one more time the few endings that need our attention. First singular in the primary has no ending, so this omicron lengthens to become omega here. And a lengthening of this epsilon to have epsilon iota, just in a blout in the second singular. The psi goes to A because the sigma is intervocalic. The alpha forces the epsilon here to lengthen to eta and the iota subscripts. Over in the secondary endings then, no ending, so the same principle that takes place here takes place here. We just remember that this nu might need to be added if, yes, the next word begins with a vowel so that we can separate this vowel, whatever it would be, from this epsilon. We include a nu. Keep in mind, the first singular and third plural are the same. exactly the same, and context is going to determine meaning. If we're just parsing a word, we don't have any context, we need to keep in mind it could be either one of those two. Last note that needs our attention, again, this saw, we have an epsilon here, sigma drops omicron, epsilon equal omicron upsilon in the contraction. Our master verb chart, this will continue to surface for us as a helpful guide, and especially remembering what stems get an augment. You can see here, yes, these past time stems, the imperfect and the aorist. And we can remember as well our tense formatives. We don't have any here in the second aorist, but we will with the first aorist in a few moments. And notice secondary, 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 secondary. There will always be correspondence between secondary and those that have an augment. Our vocab starter, again, continue to think about the relationship between the root and then the stem here with the present. And again, here the lexical form is always the present. So we'll want to continue to think about that, even though the root may look different. From the root to the present, there are regularly marks of distinction, and that's what we have with apathon and apothnesko. With ball and balo, we have a lambda here that is added as an extension, and you can see that in both of these words, from ball to balo and from apathon to apothnesko, there's an extension in the present. It's longer, where the aorist, for instance, of ball, this aorist just takes the stem is matching the root, and you'll see that when you work through this chapter. So keep up on vocab, continue to think about the nuances, and big picture today, the difference between the imperfect is the imperfect continuous in the past, but it has a stopping point. The aorist doesn't have any arrows, and it's seen as a whole. It's just viewed in a complete sense with a perfective aspect, and so the perfective aspect here, and then the continuous aspect of the imperfect.